Thank you to Father, because I don't get to speak in public very often, let alone in a Catholic setting. I've only spoken in a Catholic church twice. I was invited 2 other times, but it was canceled. Let me start by saying that I know this is a difficult topic, and I don't want to say anything that will offend anyone. But I think in order to tell the truth, sometimes it's almost impossible not to offend someone. The way when I talked with Father, I mentioned that I wanted to bring this talk around the idea of the prodigal son, and he really liked that. And there's a lot of Bible stories and passages that I always return to, but no more than the prodigal son. I always go back to that parable of Jesus. I think it's so instructive, especially for this issue, in terms of what we have gone through as people who are gay or were gay or LGBT, and the families of LGBT who have someone in the family that's gay. And this is what, let's start with this. This is what Pope John Paul said about the parable of the prodigal son. St. John Paul. The parable indirectly touches upon every breach of the covenant of love, every loss of grace, every sin. Let me just start some of the feelings that I've had about the story. And how it relates to the issue of homosexuality. Now, the prodigal son boldly asks for his inheritance, even before his father's dead. And what's always interested me too about the story is this very hard, intransigent line of unforgiveness exhibited by the older brother. It's kind of remarkable because they are thinking that, in all likelihood, that boy is dead. But miraculously, he returns and he's alive. But you still have this very hard unforgiveness in the older brother. It's hard to understand. But in that family, I think there was always something wrong in that family already, even before the boy left. There's defiance, anger, jealousy. There's some sort of sexual brokenness going on there too in the family. Because that boy, before he even leaves, you can tell he's got a taste for the perverse, because he falls rather quickly right into partying with prostitutes and loses all his money. So it's not like that boy was naive in the beginning. There was always something going on in that family. I was once one of those prodigal sons. I had an older brother I didn't get along with. But I always longed for a man to guide me and, to be my friend. But my family was a busy family, and I often felt that I was in the way. This is not unusual for young men who later become gay or come out as gay. I got along better with my mother and my 2 older sisters, and I got along with my dad and my brother. And I tended towards, a lot of solitary play and fantasy. And a real refuge for me very quickly became pornography. It was just a very safe place to hide out. None of that was good for me because it further isolated the lonely boy that I was, and that's what pornography does. That's one of the things it does. It's interesting because Hugh Hefner just passed away, and how I got into porn was through, you guys, you're so young here, But, you know, back when I was your age, it was mainly Playboy magazine, how you got into porn. This was before internet porn. So Playboy was seen as very, I guess, I don't know what would be, like XM or Maxim. Are those still around? It's sort of like a very soft core magazine. But that's how I got into it. You know, I was also a very sensitive boy. When someone would say something unkind to me, I took it very personally. With boys, you see this, sometimes it can be very cruel, especially within a sporting atmosphere. But, you know, I had friends that were sort of other rejects, and they had perhaps things about them physically that were apparent, or about their personality that opened them up to being bullied. But what they could do was that they could, you know, turn that around to humor, like a self-deprecating humor, if you know what I mean. When somebody would make fun of you for something about you, and you would turn around and make fun of yourself. I could never do that. I could never turn it around. I took things very hard. And some people do. Other boys recognized that in me, and in my demeanor, and that made it worse. At school too, some things went on. Teachers, you know, in grammar school, they're predominantly female. You know, you have very few male teachers in grammar school, and the girls and all my female teachers recognize. You'll see that in boys who later come out as gay. When they're young, they tend to have a lot of not girlfriends, but friends that are girls. Because I think girls tend to have that maternal instinct right away, and they see someone that's being rejected and beaten up on, and they turn to try to protect that person. So that's not unusual. But that was also rather damaging to me, because what that does is it sets up boys who I had a physiological similarity with, and it set them up as the other. Because I was hanging around with the girls at recess, and the girls, you know, would sit around and talk about the boys, and talk about whoever was popular as a movie star or a singer. So I started to think in that way myself. I was looking at the boys like they were looking at the boys. And at that time, I also started looking at gay porn. It was different back then. You didn't have the internet. You had to buy porn in those days. You know, it wasn't free. But you could buy it through the mail. And I started doing that. And that, the whole idea of porn opened up a whole world to me, because I saw men who were acting out what I was always thinking about. So that made me think, well, there is a world somewhere where there are gay men who live this life. I didn't feel like I was so alone anymore. I felt like somewhere, you know, there was a place for me. I didn't know where it was. But, you know, porn is a false, you know, savior. A lot of people that get into it, we put so much into it. You know, promises everything, but it just delivers nothing. And my taste for porn, even as a kid, got pretty extreme. I mean, some people will start looking at porn this rather tame and soft core, but you're quickly bored. And you know, but then you get frustrated with it, because it doesn't do the same thing. It's kind of like a drug. You would start out taking marijuana, and then you can get high on marijuana, and then you'll start doing something else. And then, you know, nobody starts out doing heroin, but they start out doing something else. And that's what it started with porn. I didn't start looking at really extreme porn when I was young. And you know, also, you know, entertainment for a lot. You see a lot of homosexuals who are obsessed with you know, even the cult, like around Beyonce. There's a lot of gay men who are very, very, that follow everything she does, and knows everything, you know, probably what she has for breakfast. And there's sort of, because it kind of replaces religion, I think, in a way. There's a cult around it. There's looking for the transcendent in something. And I got into that. And if you look, there's a lot of religious connotations, you know, from Madonna to Katy Perry to Lady Gaga. You guys might not notice it, but there's a lot of religious symbolism. And it's there for a reason, because people are drawn to that naturally. And when you don't find it in the culture, you gotta look for it. And you know, I certainly did. Just to share a little story with you, I just went to something called Leather Walk up in San Francisco because I outreach at all the gay events. And you know, what it was essentially was a religious procession, but a profane one. But I mean, they had chant and music, and but you know, it's the naked human body at the center of everything. It's instead of the body of Christ. And you know, I don't feel revulsion for these people for what they're doing. I mean, most of them don't have any clothes on, and they're in very like hardcore sort of garb and leather. But I understand where they're coming from, because they're looking for something beyond themselves, but they can't find it. And in homosexuality in the gay culture, you certainly can find it. It's sick, but it's there, and it makes sense to them, and it makes sense to me at one time. You know, and this gets back to the Catholic Church, because I'm assuming most of you are Catholic. I grew up in the church in the 1970s and 80s, when it was very much the folk mass and guitar, and everything was very sort of Catholic light. You know, we were invited up to the altar during the consecration, and we held, you know, hands with the priest during the transubstantiation. It was very strange. And I think what there was a good intention there. I think they were trying to make Jesus very approachable and very human. But, you know, they made him forgettable at that point. He was very insignificant to me. He seemed very all too human and no God there. So I walked away from Catholicism, you know, very early. When I was probably about your guys' age, 15, 16, a little younger. You know, but in high school, you know, I was noticeably different, and I think everybody picked up on that. Everybody notices the person that doesn't quite fit in, and that was definitely me. But you know, I had dreams of going to San Francisco. I was raised right outside, right in the Bay Area, and I knew that in San Francisco I'd find other gay men, and I thought I would be happy there. You know, I gotta talk about my mindset. When I went to San Francisco, I was 18. A lot of you guys won't remember this, you're so young. But at that time, AIDS was very much real. A lot of people wouldn't touch a gay man because they thought they would get it. And at that time, AIDS, if you got HIV, you were pretty much a dead man walking. You died rather quickly, you'd shrivel up, your skin would be, covered in sores. It was very bad. But I went anyway, I didn't care, because I was so tired of being alone and being picked on that I figured at least there people would accept me. And I was willing to risk death to do it. And I got there and I didn't want to have sex right away because I knew that if I did, there was a good possibility I could get it. But I walked into my first gay bar, and probably within about 5 or 10 minutes, I was 18. Somebody hit on me, and it felt really good because I had never been accepted, and nobody ever bothered with me before. So I went with it, and they were older men, all older men. That's why I got to warn fathers. Fathers, be a dad to your son. Because if you don't, somebody else will, okay? Let me just give you some statistics. I want to give some statistics for my talk. 52% of gay men aged 18 to 24 reported a recent male sex partner who was at least 5 years older. Okay, by contrast, not even 8% of heterosexual men can say that, and only 10% of heterosexual women had a sexual partner that was at least 5 years older. Because so it is, you know, it's not unusual for that to happen. You know, but I wasn't coerced by these men. You know, I wanted to do it because it, you know, it felt like a miracle to me that somebody was finally paying attention to me. You know, I mean, as a young man, no straight men ever reached out to me and said, you know, what's going on with you? It was gay men. But you know, things quickly get out of control in the gay community, and I did, and I became less cautious, and I probably became a little more desperate, and you have more and more sexual partners. Here's another stat. This is gay men. In the past year, 29% of gay men, but only 8.7% of heterosexual men reported more than 4 partners. So 29% of gay men, 8.7% of heterosexual men reported more than 4 partners. But you know, I soon got very tired of this, and I decided to partner up with somebody and try to become monogamous. That happens a lot in the gay community, especially when guys hit about 30 or 40. And you know, in my era, it happened because by then you knew a lot of people that had gotten AIDS and died. So I was tired of it, and I met somebody, and we left. We didn't leave San Francisco, but we moved to the suburbs. And but there's also something interesting that goes on in the gay community too, in the gay male community. I had a relationship with another partnered man, meaning that he had a partner, and then I was the third partner. But they made it real clear up front that this was only a sexual relationship, but the emotional relationship was just between the two of them. And here's a study that was just conducted of gay men. 76% reported having had a casual partner. 32% had only male casual partners. 44% had main and casual partners. And here's the important part. Only 24% had a main male partner exclusively. 24%, okay? They also did a study in San Francisco. 47% of men who were partnered, they were open partnerships, meaning they could have sex with other people. Now this causes a problem. This is kind of a truth bomb that I tell people, and they can't believe it. Because they think, well, you're gonna get AIDS or HIV if you go hook up with somebody you meet in a bar and you don't know them. Okay, the majority of HIV cases right now, people are contracting them in a relationship, meaning they contract it from their boyfriend or their husband. 70% of HIV positive gay men are estimated to have contracted HIV from a main partner, okay? Our data suggests that reported monogamy may sometimes reflect intent or a non-traditional definition of monogamy, okay? So like before, that partnership that I was in, it seemed to work for a while, but then I got bored with it, and then we started socializing with other partnered couples, and the relationship opened up. So I figured, why be in it any longer? So I left it. Now I want to read something to you as a quote from some of the older people my age will remember him. There was a guy named Randy Schultz. He was a gay journalist. He died in 1994 of AIDS. And he wrote a book called The Band Played On. So I encourage everybody, probably not the younger people, to read it. Wait till you're 18. But the adults, I would really encourage you to read it. And this is what he wrote. This is a gay man writing this. So let's listen to this. And I read the book when I was gay, and it impressed me. But this line I completely missed. And this is what he wrote. Promiscuity was rampant because in an all-male subculture there's nobody to say no. No moderating role that a woman plays in the heterosexual milieu. Some heterosexual males privately confided that they were enthralled with the idea of immediate, available, even anonymous sex at a bathhouse offer, if they could only find a woman who would agree. Gay men, of course, agreed quite frequently. Now, I shouldn't say before, but right after I came out as gay, I was bisexual for a while, because I really wanted to determine if I was gay. So I figured I would date women, and that would confirm it for me. And I frequented female prostitutes too. And as much as I tried, not even prostitutes that were addicted to drugs heavily would do the things that I wanted them to do. So I'm not saying that women are more discriminating, but God certainly made men and women very different. And it also just didn't work for me either. And then I knew I was gay because I needed to receive love from a man. I couldn't give love to a woman. That makes a big difference. I want to read a couple of things from the Catechism real quick, because they make so much sense to me now when you think about what he wrote, about why things went crazy and why things go crazy in the gay male community, and why there is so much sex, and why there is so much desperation, and why there is so much disease. This is from the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Everyone, man and woman, should acknowledge and accept his sexual identity. Physical, moral, and spiritual difference and complementary are orientated towards the goods of marriage and the flourishing of family life. The harmony of the couple and of society depends in part on the way in which the complementary needs and mutual support between the sexes are lived out. This is also from the Catechism. Basing itself in sacred scripture, which presents homosexual acts as an act of grave depravity. Tradition has always declared that homosexual acts are intrinsically disordered. They are contrary to the natural law. They close the sexual act to the gift of life. They do not proceed from a genuine, effective, and sexual complementary. Under no circumstances can they be approved. There's no complementary there. And I figured that out. Actually, I didn't figure it out when I was gay. I think I could have. I did later when my body fell apart. I always felt out of sync when I was gay, because I'm not going to be graphic, but the things that two gay men do together, there's no physical complementary there. It doesn't work. So in 1999, I came out in '88. In 1999, I nearly died. I had gonorrhea, I had chlamydia. These are all STDs, sexually transmitted diseases. I won't be graphic, but in the gay male community, they take on different forms. They're very painful and very physically damaging too. Many of my friends at that point were dead. So I really didn't care if I lived or died. So at that point, I think death was better. I was just so sick, and I was tired of being alone. Because I went to gay with so many hopes and dreams. I thought I was getting a community, I thought I was getting a family, I thought I'd be getting a partner, and I was still lonely. So I ended up, and I talk about all this stuff in my book in more detail, and it's graphic too. So I ended up in the hospital, and my mother showed up. Mothers always show up at at these horrible times. Thank God for our mothers. And she was praying for me, and I was dying on a hospital gurney. And I heard her praying for me, and I blasphemed her, and I blasphemed God with my last breath. And and then my idea of death changed radically, because it got very cold and it got very scary, and I knew that something was coming for me, and I didn't like it. Because I thought I was a big shot to that point. I was like, I'm gonna die, I'm gonna take it on, and no big deal, I'm just gonna die. But when the reality hit me, it was very bad, and I knew something was wrong. And I hadn't thought of our Lord Jesus Christ in many, many years. But for some reason, I just felt this need to call out his name, Dear Lord Jesus Christ, help me, save me, please. And he did. He was there within a second. And all those horrible demonic entities that were around me, they just disappeared. And they were gone. And my family always was there for me. I'm going to talk a little bit more about them. I tried to be semi-restrained around my dad. My dad is blue-collar, macho, immigrant. And I was not that. I was artistic, I was sensitive, I was kind of a girly, I was a sissy, all those things. But there was a point with my relation with my dad, I didn't care anymore. So, I brought my boyfriend home. And, one time I brought my boyfriend home and his friend. So you can imagine. This was in the 90s, before people were tattooed and pierced and branded and all that stuff. And I had all that stuff going on. So my dad knew what was going on with me. My mother just looked perpetually worried during all that time. Moms are like, I'm just gonna love this child, and I'm not gonna say anything because I don't wanna upset him, and I don't want him going away, or I'm not gonna see him. Where my dad, every time I came home, I could just tell he was doing just a burn in the corner. He was just burning. And so this time when that complementary works so beautifully in a family, because you have the mother and the father, the mother who loves us and hugs us, but you have the dad who just wants to tell us the truth and set us straight. And that's what my dad wanted to do. And so, I was ready to leave that day, and I carried on at home with my boyfriend and his friend. And my dad, very kindly, he didn't make a scene. My friends were out, I remember it very clearly, because my dad doesn't say a lot. And they had already walked out to the car, and I was getting ready to leave. And my dad just said, you're always welcome here, but don't you bring them home again. And I knew what he meant. And I was like, you know what? This is just another homophobic, bigoted slur from my father, who always put me down my whole life. He's just doing it again. He doesn't believe in who I am. He doesn't believe in my identity. So I wrote him off for a while. I stayed away. I stayed away from home. And but he always said, you're welcome here. It's by myself, not with my lover, not with my boyfriend. So I did stay away. I revered my father. Your dads. I hope your dad is in all of your lives, especially the young people. Even if your mom and dad aren't together, I hope your dad is there, because my dad was, when you're a child, your dad is like, especially because my mom wasn't working. She wasn't working outside the home, but my dad provided for me. He was like God. My food, my shelter, my clothes, everything was from my father. But my father was very critical, and I always saw my dad as unloving. And I thought of God that way too. But in the 70s, God was presented in sort of a weird way. He was very lightweight. He was sort of a folk hippie, and so that's why I walked away from him. But the God of my father father, I hope I'm making sense, was so different. My dad, the God of my father, I didn't like very much. So, Jesus was either this hate ash, berry, flower power dude that didn't care about anything. I could do whatever I want as long as it's nice people and grew flowers and all that stuff. But then the God of my dad was just, I didn't want to be around him at all. So I just rejected them both. But I felt like in the gay life, I found the best of both worlds. I found strong, masculine men. A lot of people, there's a stereotype of gay men as being, in pink and, being very effeminate, and you have that, too. But masculinity is very worshipped in the gay male community. That's why we went there. And I found that, but I also found like a compassionate, masculine man in the gay community. So I thought I found the best of both worlds. But, the requirement was I had to have sex with them in order to receive that love. And my dad really could not bear what I had turned into. I hope I look fairly normal, but then I didn't. My hair was either shaved or had a mohawk, or my hair was, pink or purple. Everything was pierced on me. My face, my ears, the parts of my body that the clothes, cover. I was just really hardcore, and the people that hung around me were hardcore. And it just broke it broke my dad's heart to see his son that way. But he didn't know what to do. But when things got so bad and I was dying, where I turned to, like the prodigal son, I turned home. And that's why that story is so important. Because where was the prodigal son right before he turned home? Does anybody remember? I mean, what was he actually doing? Yes, exactly. Yeah, he was with the pigs. There was nothing else for him to do. And if you read my book, I kind of use that illusion in my book, is that I did end up with the pigs. And you have that label in the gay community where some people are called pig. And it's not that they're being made fun of, it's something that they actually embrace. And I got into that, where I could be like a human pig. And it's just, that's how sick my life got. And there was really there's nothing else I could do. I had tried everything. So I know a lot of people are so worried about their kids that are in the LGBT community, and you don't know what the heck is going to get them out of it. Are they going to leave? You want them to, but and this is why the prodigal son story is so important, because it's the grip of that identity is so strong. I think a lot of people just have to be like the prodigal son at one point and be with the pigs, and then it wakes them up somehow. It woke me up. I think it's just the reality of death, that it's right in front of you. And I went home and I turned to two books, the Bible that my parents had, and my parents were not. Some people accuse me of being raised in a very fundamentalist family, and they say that I've returned to the faith because of guilt, because that's the way I was raised. I wasn't. I was raised in a pretty liberal home, very carefree in the Bay Area in the 70s. We didn't go to church. We're pretty marginal, so I wasn't made to feel guilty. I went to gay with a pretty clear conscience. And at that time, we were taught to follow our conscience. And the sisters, this was the sisters not in the habits. These were the sisters, that threw away the habits and were quite liberal in their attitude. And they taught us that the conscience was supreme. And that is true, that we do need to follow our conscience. But when it's informed, I didn't know anything. I was completely following emotion. And I just thought I was gay. And I was hurt, And here was a community that was accepting me. So I just figured, hey, this is for me. But you know, I went home and I read the catechism, I read the Bible. It was very clear to me what was going on. I didn't really understand it. But you know, I always felt that my father detested me. And I was at home one day and I was very ill, and you know, I had to have a bunch of surgeries to correct what I did physically in the gay life. So, you know, my parents, you know, put me through that and nursed me and helped me with all that. But I stayed in my room. Things were really still strained between my father and I, just from all the years. But I remember one time I was walking in and out of my room, probably with, you know, trying to get the Bible, because my parents had those books with the catechism, and I saw my dad praying the rosary. And you know, when I was gay, and my mom and dad were kind of in and out of the Catholic Church, but my dad's Italian, and you know, they stopped going to Mass, but my dad always kind of kept the devotions. You kind of see that in some other cultures, where the devotions remain very strong, but sometimes just slip away from the actual practice of the faith. But my dad always had that stuff around the Madonna, picture of the Madonna and the rosary. I just thought it was always so absurd, you know, when I was gay, because I always thought of myself as very sophisticated, and you know, my dad is with these beads, and you know, I couldn't figure it out. But you know, the whole time I was gay, you know, my dad was praying for me, and you know, I thought all that time I thought my dad hated me, but you know, he had prayed for me that whole time, and so I lost my train of thought. Well, hold on one second. So, you know, always hold out hope for, you know, if you have a son, a daughter, a brother, a sister, a cousin, or just a good friend that, you know, identifies as LGBT right now. Just remember their lives are more complicated than what you see. It's like the prodigal son. There was stuff going on in that family before that son took off. You know, and there's stuff going on in these people before somebody comes out. You know, sometimes it's things that look rather innocuous, but you know, it could be things I talked about as sensitivity, somebody that was bullied, or somebody that just felt different, and they could just never felt like they fit in. And that doesn't have anything to do with being born that way. And sometimes just a turn in orientation, sometimes it just takes something really dramatic to happen. But you have to remember this. This is difficult to hear. Gay will always take precedence over everything. Anything you can say, the gay will always be more important for just the reasons I talked about. Because I always felt very isolated, and gays seemed to answer so many questions that I had. And even the fear of death wouldn't take me away from gay. And you know, as difficult as it is to watch, you know, your son and daughter, you know, walk away. I mean, you can give them any reason that they ask. I mean, you can accept them. You can let the boyfriend come home and the friend, like my mom and dad, it did, but it won't, you know, it won't make it better. It won't. You know, what you really need to do is you really need to rededicate your life to your children. And that means fasting, and that means prayer, like my father did for me. And then, you know, when they do return, God willing, you know, then you can greet them. You know, they might be broken and battered and beaten, but at least they'll have a safe place. Because in the gay community, you have a lot of people that are going to affirm you. But they're not going to have many people that give you a contrary opinion. And that's what every gay person needs, and they don't have it. I outreach all the time to the gay community. And I'm strangers to these people for the most part, and I tell them things they've never heard it, because they don't have anybody in their life. Everybody is very celebratory of everything that they do, because there's really no sin that you can commit. The one sin that I committed to the gay male community is that I left. That's the only one you can do. I left. I did every sort of sexual exploit. Nobody ever said a word about it. Not a word. Because, because they grew up so much being put down. They're not going to put down anybody else, no matter how out of hand it gets. And that's not right. And this might sound defeatist, or pessimistic. But it can be almost impossible to dissuade someone if they want to come out. You can give in, you can indulge them, but what you really need to do is stand firm. Because look at the prodigal son. What if his dad had said, go ahead, do what you want. I'm for all. Where would that boy have gone when he did it? He would have had nowhere to go. And my mom and dad did keep that safe space for me. So with that in mind, contact with your gay son or daughter will be strained. If you take this point of view that what they're doing isn't good or isn't correct, it might be limited or it might be non-existent altogether. Overall, this will be a great part of the suffering you will be required to endure in order to eventually save the one that you love. Because let me tell you, you're going to be the one to do it. Because my dad played a huge part. If my dad hadn't been praying that rosary all those years, for me, I wouldn't be alive today. I know it. That's the man that I didn't like, the man that I thought rejected me, it was the man that saved me. It sounds, I still can't believe it, but but always remember the rewards will be great. For one day your tears will be transformed into shouts of joy. For this is thy brother was dead and has come to life again. He was lost and is found. God bless y'all.